Share. And so we have a pretty full agenda today. And then we have community hours right after it. Project. Alrighty. If you haven't yet, if you could go into HackMD, I put the link in the blue jeans and just add your name to the attendee list. I'll take copious notes. But we're driving this from, as we did the last time, from the OpenShift community page under projects. And we have on the agenda so far today, we have myself talking about some of the upcoming events that we have and that I'm looking for speakers for. Am I in the wrong one? I'm in the OpenShift one. Yep. Figures. Operator, framework, / community. Okay. There we go. All right. Thought that looked too familiar for me, so forgive me. So we're going to get an update on the operator framework from Rob Sumsky, who is here today with us in person. And if you are listening to this elsewhere around CoopCon, you're welcome to come and join us. We're up on the 8th floor of the Gaslight Marriott in the Gaslight Lamp room. Gas lamp? Gaslighting anybody? And then we're going to just talk a little bit about the operators' talks at the OpenShift Commons gathering yesterday, and maybe a quick update on the CNCF. And then hopefully Jeff Geerling will be joining us so we can get a quick update on his work, or not a quick update, a little presentation from him. So we'll be looking for him to join. And Chris Short is not in the room yet, but he may be giving us an operator update on his Ansible work. So without any further ado, then maybe we'll just jump in and let Rob give us an update on what's going on in the operator framework world.
All right, sure thing. We're going to try to not echo this. All right. So I was just looking at some of the releases for both SDK and OLM. We've got folks here if you want to chime in on some of these. Looks like the Lifecycle Manager just had a release yesterday. Evan, any interesting things in there?
I know it was mostly driven by some services, so that's
okay.
The main thing.
Okay, sounds like mostly security fixes. The SDK had its 0.12 release about 20 days ago, and I know that we're trying to kick off a community meeting around the SDK, and they can talk more about that timeline and things in that meeting. Looks like there's a pretty healthy stream of stuff coming into the community operators and Operator Hub IO. Looks like some updates to a number of the different things, which is really awesome. And if you haven't checked out the new CSV editor on Operator Hub IO, that is live and is a really cool way to graphically see your CSV, and you can even upload a bunch of files from your old CSV and make changes and then publish that. So it's a pretty cool little tool. If you haven't checked that out, I would encourage you to do so. I think that's most of the update that I have today, other than we had a bunch of great talks yesterday at the OpenShift Commons gathering, and heard a bunch of from folks about operators, specifically a little more interest in a Java SDK. And so I've always want to point folks to the mailing list there. I think there's a really good thread going already for folks that are interested in that, and let's keep on piling on and see if we can come together with a kind of proposal for the community to support that. I think that's about it for me.
All right. Let me just unmute myself. So I think I have a couple of things other than that, there was some folks that got to level 4 that were awarded. The videos from all of that will be uploaded hopefully by end of day tomorrow to the YouTube channel, and I'll tag them all and put them on the operator playlist as well, so that you can listen in to get the feedback from them on where they're going with that. So that was pretty good and nice to hear. Also, if you are interested in talking about your operators that you're working on or things like that, we have more upcoming OpenShift Commons gatherings. One at the end of January in London, another one the day before Red Hat Summit in San Francisco, and then another one again at Amsterdam's CoopCon in, I think it's March 30th, is day 0 for CoopCon. So there'll be opportunities for other people to come on panels and talk about what they're doing, and if they have, great case studies and stuff like that, I'm looking for people to showcase what their work is that way too. So that's one thing, and I'm in particular, I'm looking for people who are building operators for enterprise use. So if you are using an operator and not intending to ever open source it, you're building something specific to your own internal use, we'd love to hear some of those use cases too. So if you're willing and able to get to any of those, please reach out to me. Definitely trying to curate and set up those schedules, and those you can find all of them except the Amsterdam date on the commons.org site. Flop over there quickly. Under gatherings, it has the dates for them. So we're here in San Diego on the 18th, but there's one on the 29th of January, April 26th, and again, March 30th for Amsterdam and the next KubeCon in EU. There are lots of other opportunities if you have stuff that you want to showcase or talk about at meetups and other things. So if anyone really wants the podium, they have no excuse. There's lots of places to do that. So bopping back to the next topic, which is the update on the CNCF TOC. We have scheduled next presentation to the technical oversight, is that what the O stands for? Oversight Committee of CNC for December 3rd, which also coincides with my birthday. So I'm expecting a present from all of you that we get this one through. And the presentation details will be in the Google Doc that's in the agenda item there. So if you can come to that, as well as if you could add any endorsements to the TOC link that's in there in the thing here. I think I have the right TOC. That would be helpful too. So there's always chatter on that. Is there anything else we should add to that about the TOC presentation, Rob? Anyone? I think that's pretty much it. We've given this presentation a lot, so I think at this point it's just finding sponsors and that from the TOC panel to endorse it as well. So welcome. All right. So the next thing we have, and I'm looking to see if Chris Short has joined us. Maybe we don't see him on there. All right. So we had asked Jeff Bierling to give us a presentation on some of the work that he's been doing around using the Ansible operators and Magruder and other things. So I thought we would give him the floor for a little while to do that presentation, and we could come back and do Q&A and get updates from anyone else that had them. So Jeff, if you want to take over the screen, and I will make sure you're unmuted. So try talking, Jeff, or unmute yourself.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now. So there you go.
All right.
And
Very good.
and see you.
I'm coming off a cold for the past week, so throat is not completely back yet, but very close to it. I'm supposed to do a podcast interview later today, so I don't know how that's going to work. But let's see. This is the first time I've tried sharing my screen on Blue Jeans, and everyone always says that it always screws things up. So let me try. It's only allowing me to share Blue Jeans or my entire screen. Is there a way that I can have it just share like one window?
There should be, but I always go with the default, my whole screen, and then everybody gets to see, how
All right,
messy
hold on.
my inbox is.
Let me turn on Do Not Disturb, and I'll just make the window full screen. Otherwise, whoops. Apparently I have to give it permission. Let's see. I have to quit it and start it again, so hold on just a moment.
All right. While you're there, I'm just going to pop over to HackMD. If you haven't yet, if you could add your name into HackMD. If you don't want to log into HackMD, I will look in the chat and see who you are and add it in separately. And I'll also note that there is, I'm on Thursday here at CoopCon, I'm moderating a panel on operators, which has, I'm told 400 people have signed up for it, which is kind of intimidating. If they all show up, that's almost as many as showed up at the OpenShift Commons gathering. And I've asked, Andre Toast from IBM is going to be on. I'm spacing out the gentleman from Google. There's a person from Lightbend who had a health issue, but they've subbed in someone from Lightbend, and I've asked Jeff McCormick to join as well on the panel to give his perspectives. So if you're here and the room isn't full, I'd love it if you joined us, and that would be great too.
Right, so can you see my screen now?
Now we can see your screen. That's wonderful.
Great. All right. Sorry about that. That's in the 6 months I've been doing this, I have never shared a screen on BlueJeans apparently. So,
lucky.
I've been doing Ansible stuff for years and been doing Kubernetes stuff for a few years. And when the operator SDK started integrating Ansible, I thought that was brilliant because now I didn't have to learn Go at a deeper level just to write an operator. So I started playing around with a few operators. Like the first thing I did was a Drupal operator. And this one, I worked with a guy who works in Australia and does some Drupal work. And we kind of collaborated on it. I forked his, he pulled in some changes for mine, back and forth. And right now his company would like to start using the operator for their hosting for Drupal. But that's more of a long-term goal because they already built, I think, in like OpenShift 3, and they're still running like Kubernetes 1.10 or 1.11. They built a whole system for it, and they want to migrate to a new system. So that's their long-term goal. And my goal also was to have an operator because I was operating about 500 or 600 Drupal sites in a hosting environment that was the largest one I had worked on so far in EKS on Amazon. And it was getting really messy, all the manual stuff that we were doing. Not manual, but like scripts that were kind of tied together through Jenkins and other things to manage all those sites. We wanted to make it more turnkey, where you say like, here's the code base, and the person who manages the site, all they have to ever do is push a commit, and it would be GitOps basically. And an operator got us a lot closer to that, but I was in that position where I never got to see it through. So I'm still working on this one a little bit, and I'm going to try to do some more interesting things with it in the time to come. But when I started doing some work with Red Hat and Ansible, one of the things that they wanted out of the gate was something that's more of a easy to demonstrate operator, because Drupal is not simple for sure. It's kind of like throwing somebody into a large Java app instead of showing them like a Python Hello World app if you're trying to train them on how to do something. So there was already an example of a memcache operator, but the memcache operator basically starts some memcache instances, and that's not really showcasing what an operator can start doing for you versus what you can do just using a Helm chart or using raw Kubernetes manifests and pushing them into Kubernetes. So the McRouter operator, the goal for it was to make an Ansible-based operator that uses Ansible to detect a change and react to it and do things similar to how any of the other operator types would do it, but in a simple, straightforward way. And it's just complex enough that you can do things that only an operator could do without having to integrate something external. But it's also simple enough that it could be presented in a few minutes rather than a few hours or a few days. So this operator was actually turned into a Katacoda lesson, the McRouter operator powered by Ansible operator. You can see I even completed the scenario, which is good that I can complete a scenario for something I built. But the operator is fairly simple. For anyone who hasn't heard of it, McRouter is basically a proxy for Memcache, and it was written by Facebook because Facebook uses Memcache on a scale that I don't think anyone else in the world would ever use. Yeah, maybe someday, but Redis has kind of taken over as the caching layer for a lot of other applications nowadays. So Memcache is not quite as popular. It doesn't have the meteoric rising usage, but it's still in use in a lot of places, and a lot of places that use it do have a need for scaling it because once you reach a certain amount of database queries and things, you want to have more redundancy with your Memcache and more scalability horizontally. And McRouter is really the only thing I've seen that does it. But instead of having like your application having to manage where cache items go in a Memcache cluster, you can use McRouter to do that. And your application can be simpler and just point at one McRouter instance or load balancer, and then McRouter distributes the request to backend Memcache servers. And it does that inside of Kubernetes through this operator. And one of the things that I've been playing around with is how to get it to be easy to deploy. And one way that I do that is I actually have a little Ansible playbook that builds this McRouter operator manifest that's a compilation of the CRD, the roles, and everything else that deploys the operator into the cluster. This is with some defaults. So one thing that I'm looking at is how to make this so that you can customize it a little easier for different types of deployments, like if it's a cluster-wide operator or just operating in one namespace, that kind of thing. But the way that I have that set up now is if you want to deploy this into a new Kubernetes cluster, you can just apply that manifest, which drops the operator into the default namespace. And then you can put a McRouter instance, which by default gives you 3 Memcache servers behind McRouter. And then it just sets it up for you in any namespace. The example here is just in the default namespace too, but by default, this is a cluster-wide operator. And most of the ones that I'm setting up, I do that because in most of the scenarios I've been in, we wanted to be able to have like a database operator and an application operator for something that we were going to host hundreds or thousands of instances of, and each instance would be in its own namespace. If we had to manage an operator in each namespace and the application that operator manages in each namespace, it wouldn't really save us a whole lot of overhead. And usually we would do a cluster-wide upgrade of whatever that thing was. So if we were going to go from Postgres 9.2 to 9.3 or something, that would be a cluster-wide operation, not per application that we were running. But anyway, so this operator was created for that purpose, and it's fairly simple in that you can play with the Memcache pool, how many servers it's running, and also it can change whether the pool is replicated or sharded. McRouter has a bunch of different options for how it distributes data into the cache backend, but I intentionally limited it to just these 2 options because most of the other options require a ton of logic and also require your application to kind of understand what's going on. And a lot of the people who might be attempting to use McRouter would probably not be that deep into the engineering side. And if they are, then my suggestion would be to fork this and build on top of it to do exactly what you need to do. Because that's serving all those use cases would just make this way more complicated and go from being, I think it's only a few lines of YAML to being dozens of lines of YAML and a lot more variables and things. Which is not bad, but for an operator that I'm not actively using, I'm not going to maintain that much. I'm just going to maintain enough to make it a good demo that keeps working. So, but that's the McRouter operator. And it's pretty simple and pretty easy to show how it works. And I have some stuff in here on how you can test it with Molecule. This operator, I only have it working with Kubernetes and Docker, which is the default, one of the default scenarios that it comes with to let you test locally or in CI environments. But I also have some instructions for how to kind of suss everything out and make sure that McRouter is doing all the things it's supposed to be doing. And a lot of this, what's in this README, is kind of codified into this McRouter scenario in Katacoda that teaches you how to deploy the operator and how it works and all that, which I thought it was pretty slick the way that's all put together because you can do it all in your browser. Another operator that I wanted to mention, which is one that I've been working on more recently, is the Ansible Tower AWX operator. I've been talking to the team that works on Tower's installer for OpenShift and for Kubernetes. And it's interesting because I think that long-term we might be able to make it so the operator and the standalone installer that they currently use, that's kind of just an Ansible playbook that's wrapped up in a downloadable zip file. I think that we might be able to use the exact same Ansible role for the Kubernetes work between the two, that's kind of the goal of the operator SDK with Ansible, is that you could have roles that, as long as they work on Kubernetes resources, you could use the same role, whether it's a standalone Ansible playbook running in Ansible Tower, whether it's an operator or anything. So that's one of my goals for this long term. And another thing that's nice about this operator is it can work with Ansible Tower or the open source unsupported version, AWX. And all that really requires is changing one variable. I'm still working on documenting this one and all that, but one of the things that I did for this operator was made sure I could use it in MiniCube, because it's nice to be able to use MiniCube's ingress and other things that are a little harder to do if you're working in the kind environment, so that you can test things like web requests through your browser and all that kind of stuff. So I'm planning on bringing some of this, the MiniCube test scenarios, which are very similar to the kind test scenarios. There's only a few differences. I'm trying to merge that all together, put it into the default scenario so that anyone using Operator SDK, if you build an Ansible operator, you could test it in kind or MiniCube or like a bare OpenShift or Kubernetes cluster. That's my long-term goal, and because for me, I can't work. It's hard for me to work in like new cloud clusters all the time, because a lot of times I'm grabbing my laptop going somewhere and I want to be able to bring the cluster up in a few seconds and be able to start doing some debugging locally, especially when I'm moving around at a conference where Wi-Fi is terrible, or when I'm traveling, or a lot of times I have some time, like I do something with my kids and I don't have a very reliable internet connection, so it's easier for me to work locally in MiniCube or in a kind environment. And I plan on doing a couple blog posts about this operator at some point, talking about the molecule and MiniCube integration for local development. And I'll also be probably talking a little bit about it, and also working with the Tower team on trying to figure out how we can get this to be an official operator for Ansible Tower. I know I had talked to them about it originally, and they were like, well, we already have an official installer for OpenShift. And it's like, yeah, but if you can get on Operator Hub, and somebody goes here and they just click on like, oh, I want something from Red Hat. Where is it? You go here and you click Red Hat, and right now you don't see Ansible Tower. Like it'd be cool if all the applications that we have had an operator on Operator Hub, and you just click on it, get the information, install it in your cluster, and you're done. That's something that I think that's my long-term goal for this is where Kubernetes starts being more awesome and more useful for people, is when we have these operators, when we have them get supported, and when they get to number 2 and number 3 are the two that I think make the biggest impact. Number 4 and 5 are cool and awesome and get us further in everything, but right now most things with Kubernetes barely do basic install. And when they do, they do it, sometimes very poorly, and make it harder to do the rest of it. So I think getting these kind of operators up and running to seamless upgrades and full life cycle is going to accelerate adoption of not only the Kubernetes and OpenShift, but the operators that we're building on them and the tools that we're integrating with the operators. Anyway, I'm going to stop talking because my throat's about to rip open, but I would love to answer any questions or discussion, anything like that. So I don't know how to get back to blue jeans. There we are.
There you go. Good. Camilla had an idea. If Camilla is,
Makefile.
yeah. So if, Camilla, if you want to unmute yourself, let me see if I have to unmute you. Yeah, you just have to unmute if you want to talk to that point.
No, I just point that another way to make easier to install and to uninstall that we add in the samples is by using the making file, creating targets to test and load stuff.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That would be it'd be nice if we can make that kind of a standard too. And also, Camila, I owe you a few responses and a few PRs, so don't worry. I don't ignore you. I just have them in my inbox and I'm waiting to get to them.
Don't worry. Really thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Does anyone else have any comments or questions for Jeff? Or is there my one question for you, Jeff, and I know I've asked you this before. The work you're doing on for Drupal is, and that looks like right now it's in your personal repo. Is there any conversation with the Drupal.org wonderful community that we all know and love to move that possibly into their repo and have that be something that is a Drupal wide?
There has been, because right now, about 6 months ago, we started a Kubernetes CMS SIG in Drupal, which it's not like an official Kubernetes SIG, and it's not an official Drupal SIG, but it's basically all the people that use Kubernetes and Drupal. We have a Slack channel on the Drupal Slack. We have meetings at pretty much every Drupal camp and DrupalCon that happens. And we've had online meetings every other month for the past 6 months. And we're getting slightly closer to a point where that might happen, but the hard thing is like mainline Drupal, there's not as many people using Kubernetes yet. There's a couple hosting providers that are starting to move to it. But a lot of them are still just, lots of VMs on Amazon or wherever. And they don't really have a plan yet to get to Kubernetes. I think once we get a couple more of the bigger hosting providers on board, that could be a serious conversation. But the hard thing is in open source, it could be, 3 months, it could be 3 years. Who knows? The Drupal community is a lot less structured than a lot of the other open source communities. Like there's not as much pressure from the top unless it's like one of the 2 or 3 major initiatives, and Kubernetes has not been. Right now, the major things in Drupal are the ease of use and the updating, design themes and things like that to make it more competitive with some of the major Drupal CMS competitors.
Well, I will. I know a few of them, so I'll see. Yeah, I'll reach out to you separately and see if we can do that, because it would be. Even if you're still the one supporting and everything, if it lived and breathed under the Drupal.org repo, it would probably get more stars and probably more feedback. And so maybe if there is the next unofficial SIG meeting, maybe we could bring it up there, and I'll join you for that call and see if we can make that happen. Yeah. There's a couple of Drupal leads that are up in the Vancouver area where I live, and I can see what I can do to get them on board with that too.
It's also interesting. One group of the people in that SIG are really pushing for build packs, which I had never heard of, but apparently it's a Heroku thing, and I don't know how that relates so much to operators, but
it doesn't yet. You don't have an SDK for build packs in your back pocket, anybody? Nobody? Looking around the table, nobody's doing that one yet. I think we're more interested in Java at the moment and me Python. So yeah, so I'd like to see that happen, and then get it into operatorhub.io. So that would be great. And anyone else has any questions or feedback? Been around the table here because I can do that because there's people in the room with me for a change. We're doing it face to face here up the Marriott. There's a note from Mandana Vaziri, also that there's another operator from IBM, Composable, which I hadn't seen, and it's in Operator Hub. I should have seen that by now, and I'm just looking at that now at the moment, and that's a basic install. Mandana, are you able to talk to that a little bit now? Are you still with us, Mandana? She is? Okay. I don't know, I can't hear her, so I'm there. No worries, Jeff, take care of that throat of yours. And when you do that podcast, let us know and we'll all listen in. Is Mandana Vaziri available?
Sounds like you can't hear her.
I can't. Yeah. You're unmuted. You might have to turn your volume up. And I'm just going to share my screen and go to that composable operator that you mentioned. And just pausing. He's going to restart. So we'll pause for a minute there. And let her restart and maybe give us a few words about what's going on with that one. Does anyone know if that's Helm based or what is that a go? Come on. And then I'll ask again, if you haven't yet added yourself into the MD, please so put it in the chat. Do that and give everybody a minute. It is go. Well, that's cool. These things are coming into Operator Hub faster than I can notice them. In the beginning, I was tweeting out every time a new one came in. I'm like, yay, thank you, crunchy data. Oh, thank you, Missouri, thank you. And now it's like, okay, wait a minute. So we'll have to figure that out. I'm not even sure what the password is for the Twitter handle anymore. Really? I'm sure it's baked in somewhere, but I'll have to look and start doing that again. So let's see. Do we have Mandana back? I can only ad lib so long.
Yeah, we should schedule her for.
Yeah, so if she can't get back in and make sound, that would be great. And then again, I'm going to put up the, I don't see Chris Short online. Does anyone have any other updates or anything while we wait for her to see if she's got access? Otherwise, I'm going to go back to the calendar again. Here. Done that. We've done Gerling. Daniel Messier isn't with us. I think he's probably, hopefully, did he have a baby?
I haven't heard yet.
I haven't heard yet. So we're wishing him luck and with that, and him and his family. And is there any update on the Operator SDK today? No? Okay, it's wonderful to look around the room. That is like so optimal. So it's once in a while. Let's just see if she's back in. And let me just see if I have to unmute you. And nope, Mandana, I think what we're going to do is we're going to let you present at the next meeting, which brings up our always final fun topic of when do we meet next. I always looking at the calendar now. So if we did it again in 1 month, that would bring us to the 8th, the 9th of December. Is that about right, Cadence? Or should we do it on the 16th? That's a Monday. No, we want Tuesdays, the 17th.
17th.
17th?
It's a little close.
Yeah. Does that interrupt with anybody's holidays? And Mandana, can you make that for?
Hi, Diane. Can you hear me now?
Absolutely can. So
Oh,
yeah.
wonderful. I just dialed with the phone. I figured it'd be easier than making
All
Blue
right.
Jeans work.
Do you want to walk us through your operator now and take the time if you've got the time? Am I putting you
Sure.
too much?
Absolutely. Yes.
All right.
I mean, I wasn't prepared to do so, but I can give you a quick kind of informal update on what that is. So this is basically shared my screen. Okay, let me see if I can manage that. So, I mean, just to let you know what this is an operator from IBM Research. It's in preview at this point. So it was published on Operator Hub as of yesterday. And what it is sort of like, it's not actually managing an application or anything like that. It's kind of a basic operator that can give more capabilities to other existing operators or other resources. And so essentially what it does is that it allows you to, it lets any other resource to become dynamically configurable. So what you can do is take an existing resource and wrap it inside a composable object. And then any field can be annotated to have a value that says get value from, which is sort of indicating that you have a reference there. And at that point, what the controller operator does is that it takes these annotations and then it resolves them, and then it deploys the underlying object. So, so this is useful, for example, if you have resources that need some piece of data that has to be produced by the deployment of another resource. Like, for example, imagine you have a Kafka, you have a Kafka source. Your Kafka source needs a bootstrap, URL. And so what you have to do is to first deploy the Kafka in order to obtain this URL. And then you have to take this piece of information and put it in your Kafka source YAML and deploy your Kafka source YAML. So this is sort of inconvenient because then you have to stage the development of various resources. But if you have composable, then you can dynamically configure them. So then you can take all of your YAML, including whatever operator was deploying the Kafka in the first place, and your Kafka source, deploy all of that YAML at the same time, wrap the appropriate things in composable, and then just let Kubernetes do its job. Does that make sense?
Everybody's nodding their head in the room. Yes.
Oh, okay. Everybody's nodding their head. Okay, let me see if I can.
Yeah. So, and I was sharing my screen and the location. So, but yes.
Oh, okay. Is it? Are people seeing my screen now?
Yes, we are.
Okay. All right. Very good. So I have an example here, the Kafka source example that I was mentioning. So as you can see, for example, this particular resource has a bootstrap server field, and you have to hardwire those values. But in order to obtain these values, you have to first deploy Kafka and then wait for it to successfully deploy. And then you can actually obtain this information, put it in this YAML, and then deploy the YAML. So what people do when they have solutions that are made of many different resources is that they either have, some kind of, documentation that says first you have to deploy this, then you have to deploy that, or they have scripts that can be brittle and error prone. And in any case, once you set up one of these solutions, it's very difficult to then go through that workflow again when you have different environments and you have production, testing, staging, etc. So what we would like to do is to enable people to just take all of their YAML and be able to just deploy it at once. And so what we would do in this case is that we would have this composable object. And then inside it, we have a template, and you put the Kafka source as a template inside of it. And for the Bootstrap server, we have this reference that we call get value from. And there you can actually point to any other Kubernetes object. So in this case, it's a secret that happens to point at the binding for that Kafka service that has this particular data with the broker URL. And the other thing to note is that in this case, sometimes there's data sort of formatting mismatch. So composable also provides some data transformers that you can pipe together. So in this case, we take a base64 encoded data and get a string out of it, and that happens to be a JSON, transform it to an object that's an array, and then we get a comma-separated string out of that, which is what is the data format that's expected here in the Kafka source. And so what happens with the composable operator is that when it receives this input, the controller for the composable is going to take the template, and at once it's going to try to get all of the values for the objects that are being referenced. And this is important because we want to get a consistent view of the objects and not read them in piecemeal, so that we don't get values that never actually happened in etcd. And so once we're able to resolve these, all of the missing holes in the underlying object, then composable, what it does is that it goes ahead and deploys the underlying object. And it's sort of basically it's responsible for the life cycle of the underlying object. So if you actually delete manually the underlying object, the composable operator would bring it back, etc. And if you delete composable, it would delete also the underlying object. So that's pretty much it. Any questions?
That's got to be about the freshest update ever. So thank you for getting that in there. I think Rob Sumsky had a couple of comments. I'm going to make him talk.
Hey, yeah. So, all right. So I posted a link to this service binding operator that some of the Red Hat folks have been working on, and I'm curious. I think they sound like they play in the same space but have different models, which is interesting. The service binding is a more of a late binding kind of thing, where it's like a more of a after you have both operators running or both applications running, that then they're connected, versus this is kind of doing that all in the beginning. One of the questions in the room here was about security of this, because I think one of the principles of the service binding operator is that you declare which fields people can bind to, versus this, it seems like, is it taking more of a you can bind to everything approach? Like, how do you protect other applications' data at that point?
Yes, that's a great question. I think there's a great link here between this and the service binding work. And we're currently trying to see if some of the stuff that's been done with service binding, if you could actually do it with a composable operator. I think service binding has a very specific purpose, whereas composable really allows you to do anything. It's a more sort of basic functionality that you can then use to implement other things. So it could be that we could use composable in order to achieve what service binding is trying to do. In terms of security, that's a great question. Right now, it's not great. I'll admit that, because we're using an unstructured object to represent anything, really. And so in terms of RBAC, we're giving the composable operator all sorts of permissions that we shouldn't be. It can do anything, basically. So in the future, what you could do is to say that composable, here's the list of CRDs or resources that we're allowing composable to wrap. And then at that point, we can give very specific permissions to composable so that, it's not doing, it's not too permissive. So that would be one way of tackling that problem. But it's true. Today, the way it's written, it's completely generic. It uses the unstructured type.
Gotcha. Yeah. Shows the power of it, but then, yeah, there's always those security concerns, unfortunately.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Yes. So just to add something to this is that Mandana and I are also involved in the discussion for the service binding operator. We've been actually in the first call that was led by Kyle Schlosser from IBM. And we're actually on the agenda for the next call, where we going to actually talk about another operator that we had in Operator Hub, that is the IBM Cloud Operator. And the idea there is also to show some integration between them and the service binding operator, because then we can essentially use the service binding operator to create some of the service binding requests and basically inject that way the credentials into the pod specs. And potentially we can also show maybe some ideas, how we can achieve something similar using composable. I think, the SIG for service binding is still relatively in early stages. So I guess the idea is to try also to get ideas from other work in the community and see if we can somehow come up with a more stronger proposal overall. I think it's still something, I guess, going on. But of course, I think the main difference is that the service binding was very focused on a very specific scenario, and this one we are talking about here, it's really trying to solve maybe a more general, broader kind of problem. Basically, for every kind of resource you can have in Kubernetes, you have a way to now provide this kind of dynamic binding to other things, and they can be pretty much anything. So it's not really a constraint. Of course, there is also this idea that in this case, we are kind of wrapping something versus not wrapping and injecting after the resource is created. So those are very different approaches. In one case, someone may like this or may not. So we're still basically trying to test the water and see who basically have concern with this approach or not. Right? That's still relatively early for us.
Are you folks working with inside the? It sounded like you were. I just want to make sure that we're all working in the service binding working group to bring these ideas forward. So maybe we all can work together on this.
Yeah, right.
Perfect.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're
Perfect.
part of so that. Yes.
That's good. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, back to me. Good. We're managing the echo with finger pointing here, so it's working out good. So thank you. Great update, Mandana, and good to hear about the next operators coming out of IBM. Unless someone else has, I'm looking to chat pretty quick. Yes, and they are probably, we're not watching the keynote right now. Somebody's talking about the operator SIG, SDK in the keynote right now. Must be Aaron Boyd, whom is our missionary on that mission from our liaison to the TOC. So yeah, I had said I was going to live stream the video, but it's happening simultaneously. So we'll have to watch the recording and see how all that went. Is there any other topics? I think we landed on the 17th of December for another SIG call. We'll probably have keep an eye on the mailing list and the group, the Google group, for any other updates. And if you have a topic that you want to talk, again, I'm going to share my screen and try and convince you all to use the page here in Community to add proposed agenda items. So please feel free to do that, and I'll update this now with the next meeting, and we will continue to use this URL that's in here for the Blue Jeans meetings for future ones, as opposed to the expiring one. So I will make sure that we're there. So again, I'm going to repeat this like a broken record. If you have something you want to talk about that's operator related, please reach out to me, and I will try and get you a podium at any of the at the OpenShift Commons gatherings that are coming, or give you an hour to talk about it as an OpenShift Commons briefings, or help you find a meetup or someplace to pontificate about your wonderful work. There's a lot of them out there now, so we really want to get that feedback to all of the folks working on the SDKs, and I'm looking forward to seeing that Java SDK emerge soon as a wholly usable thing. So we'll keep you posted. Maybe we'll put that on the agenda for the next time and see if we can move that forward a little bit. Is there anything else from anyone in the room? Not? Oh, that's right. One more thing. I'll unmute and you go.
Yeah, just wanted to announce that CoopCon tomorrow, 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock, here in the Gaslamp Marriott OpenShift conference room. I thought it was. Anyway, hopefully they can hear 2 to 4 tomorrow here at CoopCon. We're going to have a meetup, Cube Builder controller runtime, open to the public. Anybody here that wants to attend it can. And
it's in the same room we're all sitting in right now, and I'll tweet that out and we'll put it on the mailing list in a few seconds. So if you want the details for that, so that's the Cube Builder